So we are so thrilled to have the multi-talented physician and author, Dr. Joanna Pearson, here to join us. I'm personally very committed to getting her a little bit more integrated into the narrative medicine canon because her work is just pristine. Joanna is the author of now 4 books, one of which is a YA novel. The other is a book of poetry called Oldest Mortal Myth. This is something that's been featured in our curriculum at TCU and UNTHSC School of Medicine, and especially in book clubs. So some of you have already read Dr. Pearson's work. She also recently wrote a book of short stories called Every Human Love, and she has one coming out this fall called Now You Know It All. We are so thrilled to have Dr. Pearson with us tonight. She calls herself a lapsed poet, and I always chuckle at that because I feel like whatever she writes is just so stunning and interesting. I will share, I have the great privilege of knowing Dr. Pearson personally, and there's an interesting juxtaposition of her work, which can be pretty gritty and fearless about talking about dark topics, and Dr. Joanna Pearson, the person, who's this kind of ray of light and kind of bubbly, and you would never expect it. So I haven't read Now You Know It All yet, but I really am looking forward to it. And for now, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Pearson to take it away. We're so lucky to have you. I'm so glad that you're here. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. This is, the pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine. And, you know, Lauren, I think, Lauren, you are single-handedly making Oldest Mortal Myth into a cult favorite. You are doing that, and I'm so appreciative. And plus, I just think this is the coolest program. Those of y'all who are medical students, I just can't imagine how lucky y'all are to be at a medical institution that values this and that has these, you know, leading academic, brilliant minds. I'm so jealous, really. I'm envious. I would like to go back to do this program. So I'll read y'all some stuff, but I'm not a great monologuer, so I would love to fairly soon turn it into maybe more of a conversation with Lauren, with any of y'all. And so with that, like, you know, if the spirit moves you and you want to type something as I'm reading, I would welcome it. Yeah, and I actually, at first, when Lauren talked to me about this, I do feel a little bit distant from the poetry world. But then today I started reading some poems and thinking about what I was going to read. And I thought, you know, the advantage of this is that you can finish it. You know, with a short story, they're too long. I can't finish one. So maybe I'll just pick some things and see where the evening leads. And I will, you know, if somebody has a request, I'll take a request. So I am going to start with a poem from early on, an Oldest Mortal Myth called Leta. Now, a myth that some of you all may know or may be able to gather from the poem if you don't know it. Leta. In the most beautiful rape story, he comes as a swan. Above her, wings beat hard, spreading the scent of muck and lake. Then there's a parting squawk, arc of his neck almost apologetic as he takes off. But in the worst, and this will always be the case, she is shivering and has your little sister's face, an old pillow pressed into her mouth, musty taste of feathers, mildewed heat, choking cough. No longer do they break with gravity, no lift, no odd consoling courtesy, nor do they feign the half shyness of those who metamorphose for cloaked purposes, yet still take the shapes, the dark prerogatives of gods. Starting off on a light note, Yeah, I think there is something really rich and fascinating about the realm of myth. That's me being Professor Obvious. That's nothing new. But I think particularly in the world of narrative medicine, the medical humanities, it feels like it's particularly rich terrain. And that was not, I'm not from the narrative medicine establishment. This is just sort of all instinct. But thinking about that as I read to y'all. Let's see. We'll stick with the world of myth. This is Minotaur. You all know who the Minotaur was, right? Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna assume yes. Minotaur. He's formed wrong-halved, uniquely, unlike the people-faced hybrid creatures, muscled centaurs, foliage-shaded satyrs, sleek mermaids weaving water, flicking light with iridescent tails. He bears his heavy cow head above shivering human knees and mollusk-soft genitals. Misfit of the half-breeds, he shames, reminder always of the royal wife crouched, lowing in moonlight for her stud bowl. It's no wonder he's bitter. In that stained labyrinth littered with dry bones, the stench rising from blood-matted fur, animal heat misting from his nostrils. He hates as one can only hate when others are repulsed. The Athenian youth are sent, bedewed and draped in terror, and his halfling heart beats faster. They scream at his approach. He grunts, distressed again, then devours them. But watch with what slow tenderness he pauses, dismembering each lovely, sweet-fleshed woman. Yeah, I'm a really nice, affable person in real life. I wear athleisure. I have kids. I'm really going straight to the darkness for y'all. But I think one of the poems I was actually thinking about, because I don't think about poetry as much these days, but in revisiting some of these and just sort of thinking about the place that my mind was in at the time of writing many of these. And I thought of a poem that y'all may have come across in your studies, because I feel like it's so, I think it's apropos. Do you know W.H. Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts? No. I feel like I should read that to you guys. It's fairly short. But I think what it gets at, so yeah, chef's kiss, like it gets at so well, is this sort of strange juxtaposition between the terrible suffering and life sort of going on, which I think is I think that is bound to be a thing that comes up in thinking about narrative medicine. Do you mind? It's not my poem, but I would love to read it if people are not familiar with it. Let me do that. It's a good trick to read a poem by the masters. Musée des Beaux-Arts. This is by W.H. Auden. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position. How it takes place while someone else is eating, or opening a window, or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. And there's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away, quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and said, "Hold on." If that's not devastating, I don't know what is. And for those of you who have some working knowledge of art history, the title, I wish I could share an image with you, but Musée de Beaux-Arts, he's thinking about these great paintings of the master and how, you know, there'll be these Bruegel's painting where there's the Christ birth and the children are just hanging out and skating on the pond, or the fall of Icarus. You see tiny, tiny, tiny Icarus feet just poking up out of the water in the sort of far corner of the frame, but it's far from central to the overall painting. I don't know why that feels important to share, but it seems appropriate for this evening. Let me read something else that I wrote instead of a famous person. This is a poem called Bells. Once these bells were rung to ward off plague and bring the faithful thronging through the doors. Today, old ladies leave with Sunday's vague sense of something that ignores the rote confession of metallic notes, swung only rarely from the weathered tower, beseeching no one. Nothing marks the hour. But now and then an antique clanging floats above bent heads of people in the town who shuffle, dull-tongued, keeping their eyes down, yet sometimes whisper, find they still desire old words, the ululations of a choir, and notice when the birds all scatter south, when the clapper breaks inside its burnished mouth.
Joanna, we're excited to hear from you. I kind of want to know what your favorite piece is and to hear you read it, but that's my selfish bias.
I like that, but yeah, I don't know. Here's what I'll say. How does it? I don't know how this is going to sound. What I will say is, it's a weird thing to come back to work that you feel fairly distant from. I think this came out in 2012, at least the first edition did. And so it's not like, I mean, definitely I'm not at my house just like reading my poems every day. So I haven't read them in a long time. I mean, in fact, like it's almost like once you've thoroughly edited a thing, you're done with it. And I think the thing I will say of all the things that I've done, I very much feel once upon a time I wrote a YA novel, almost, as Lauren mentioned, almost as a dare, like almost like if your friend was like, you could write a romance novel, and you were like, I bet I could. I mean, that was sort of the YA novel. So the YA novel, I never plan to read at any reading, maybe except under duress. And it very much feels like, you know, like if your mom had like a picture of you from the middle school prom and you were like, that's me, I guess, but I'm not gonna use it as one of my profile photos at this point. This, I will say, I came back and I was like, oh, I stand by it. Like these are like, this feels like when I did love poetry. I'm not embarrassed of it like I would be about a middle school photo of myself. But I don't know. I actually like, I have a lot of favorites in here, but I also think that this is kind of this is sort of a Joanna sweet tooth material, but which I think is also the material of my stories. Like it's a little dark, a little something. I think that I might know, Lauren, maybe one of your favorite poems, maybe it wasn't a favorite, but maybe it is just served the purpose as being illustrative of something. So either way, either it's been useful as illustrating something or it's one you like, but I think it's Ministrations, right? Okay. I'll read that. Ministrations. Sometimes the gentlest patient in the emergency room is from the city prison. This one too, soft voiced, lifting his large dark eyes. He whispers, "Yes, ma'am," shy as a deer, young and brown skinned with loosely muscled limbs gangling off the bed. His clean, uncoiled anatomy is almost embarrassing against pus and pannus, abscess and scarred vein, everyone bearing his body like some separate, stricken animal, its disappointments inevitable. It seems impolite for us to notice the fact we are the same age. His silver handcuffs, track marks, the inefficiency of my exam, a rising smell of hot dung from the old lady in the next bed. Once, when realms were not distinct, celestial and earthly, angels visited, God-wed women ministered, bathed the feet of sinners, dough muzzled the saints' hands. And this would be the moment of cloud break revelation. There are no figs or honey here, just betadine and isopropyl pads. Yeah, that feels very much of my medical students experience. Although I will say, and maybe this is a side topic for talking about art, about poetry, about fiction. There's something really funny that that happens where if you write a story, people don't necessarily, like if I write a story about picking up a hitchhiker, you know, my misguided moment where I pick up a strange hitchhiker in rural Georgia, people don't automatically say, "Oh, Joanna, I can't believe you picked up that hitchhiker in the middle of Georgia. That you know, that seems like a really bad idea." But I do think because there is such a tradition, a very, maybe very American tradition of confessional poetry. And obviously a lot of the speakers of poems are very autobiographical. I think that sometimes people really, really do assume that poems are nothing but autobiography. And I don't think this poem is in here, but I once wrote, what was that poem? It was something about, and it was sort of like based on like all things. It's like you live life, there's truth. It is metabolized some way into the stuff of art. Like you see little things here and there. In this case, you know, you see something in the emergency room, but it's not memoir. You're not recording fact. But I wrote a poem about someone who is working in the emergency room and runs into, in fact, I think I also read a story about this, a person that she thinks was her mugger. She had been, you know, mugged, and she runs in. And I had someone email me and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this happened to you. I'm so sorry." I'm laughing not because it's funny that would happen, and it very well could have happened, but I just, anyway, tangent. I think that I think it's interesting how that really becomes blurred.
I would really love for you to talk about, I mean, you are a physician, you went to medical school, you're also a poet, a writer, an artist. Can you talk to us about that relationship between you know, your life as an artist, your life as a physician, and
Yeah.
how do these things connect? What is the meaning for you? I'm just curious to hear a little more about that.
No, it's such a great question. It also feels like a question that I ought to have answered on a bunch of personal statements really articulately at one point. So I also feel like I've lived a lot longer than those personal statements now, so I should have a better answer. You know, I think I do think it goes back to sort of what I was saying earlier. I think there is a thing that I'm very uncomfortable with, and that I feel very squeamish about, and I always want to emphasize that there's a thing that I'm not doing. And the thing that I'm not doing is lifting anecdotes, twisting details, making it HIPAA compliant, and then making it into a fiction. Not to say that that can't be done ethically. I think that, there are therapists and there are people who write nonfiction and they have consent forms and you know, they're doing nonfiction work that does that. But that's not what I'm doing. And to me, especially with fiction, there would be something really, even if HIPAA compliant, it would feel very vulture-ish to me to sort of do that. But having said that, I think it all gets metabolized. And so I think that, there's no, it's no coincidence that, I'm very interested in, um, I, I'm interested in inflection points, emotional inflection points, mental and emotional difficulty. Certainly there is some psychiatry stuff in there. I mean, I think certainly if you read my first collection of short stories, you could probably make an educated guess that, oh, this person may have gone to psychiatry residency. You could make that guess and you could tell. And I think similarly with the forthcoming collection, you could probably say, oh, I wonder, this person might have some, not to say that every story is that. But I do think, I think that the flip side is that, for me, psychiatry in particular is very narrative based. I think there's a lot of meaning making that happens for patients. I think that the therapy experience is sort of a shared making of a narrative to understand things or to change things. I think it's, the clinical history is that. And I think, I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but I think psychiatry, I think all of medicine this holds true, but I think in psychiatry, it's particularly true. I feel like I just rambled. Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Jace, okay.
And I want you to, I think one thing I'm really curious about, and it might be driving this in a direction, but in this time where we're really looking at physician resilience and physician, these, well, and I'm interested in this in particular, sort of moral injuries that physicians are witnessing and experiencing on a broad scale right now, and where people keep that stuff, the stuff of their lives, and sort of, what are your thoughts, both as an author and an artist and a physician, about what we're watching right now and where that stuff is taking us?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question. The short answer is I don't know. I mean, I tend to think when it comes to art engaging with a kind of collective trauma, I think there is an inevitable delay. It's almost like when you're in the midst of it, you're surviving it, you're getting through it, and you can't, I mean, that sounds like it's all terrible. I think when you are living through a glory days, I think you're too close to it to write about it at that point. And so I think that, I mean, we just had, this is a totally different thing, but I think about how right after September 11th happened, people said, well, who is gonna, like, how is that ever gonna be, like, are people just not gonna talk about it in art or stories or movies or, I think you couldn't touch it too close to it really, like, or it was, you could dare to try, but you better come correct. You don't, there's certain things that if you tackle them, you owe it to the gravity of the material to do it darn well. And I sort of think that right now, I don't know, but I wonder if this may not be exactly what you're asking, because I think I'm thinking about people who are experiencing it and then metabolizing it into some kind of writing, be that, memoirs or whatever. I think there's going to be a lag. And so needs to finish first.
Can you tell us a little bit about your new collection?
You're so kind to ask that. Yes, I can, and gladly. And I will tell you, I would be so grateful if anyone wants to read it. So I wish I don't yet have my author's copy, so I wish I could, hold it up and show you. It's called Now You Know It All. It's a collection of short stories. It seems like I keep going back to the word dark. There is a little bit of a strain of creepiness. I think that Shirley Jackson, like that kind of vibe, gets thrown in there. These stories are not so much rooted in myth directly, but how can I describe them? They're definitely concerned with people at points of decision. And I think one of the things I'm most interested in is I don't like, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm most interested in stories where, or poems or anything, where there's nuance and complication. I'm not interested, for instance, in the story of the hero doctor, or nor am I interested in the story of, my patient, the hero, Mr. McGillicuddy, who taught me a valuable lesson. That I think that's fine, and I think that's good, and I think that's sort of an important thing. If that didactic hasn't come through, then it ought to. But in terms of literature, I think I'm more interested in stories where kind of everybody's on the hook. Everybody's on the hook. Everybody is sort of that are fraught. That's super vague. Edward P. Jones selected it for the school prize. And so sometimes when I'm feeling sad, I'm like, well, Edward P. Jones liked it. He's awesome. So maybe you'll like it too. Yeah, so that's it. Are there other in the group, or are there other like writers, medical student writer, other narrative medicine?
Yes.
People in the crowd, yes.
One of our students is backing away slowly to try to get off camera, but
Do you relate, Joanna?
Yes. Oh yes, totally.
Can I turn it? Oh, there she is.
Oh, there
she is.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I am curious if I would love to hear if other people especially people who are sort of in the thick of it in medical school and whatnot with the pandemic. I'm curious their thoughts to some of Chase's questions too, especially if they also write or create things, but no pressure.
I mean, at least for me, like, so I lost both of my grandparents to COVID. And so I wrote like about that, and it kind of helped me process it a little bit. Like each one of the poems I wrote for them. But I do think like people will have to step away and like take some time away from the pandemic before, unless you like everyone is personally experiencing it, and it was good for me to use it to process. But I do think, like you were saying, like time away from it needs to end and then come back to it in order to do it justice.
I'm sorry for your loss, but I think you're right. I think now that you point that out, I do think there are kind of maybe two modes of writing, and maybe the one that you engaged with, it sounds like really effectively and probably very beautifully. I think there is like every now and it's a beautiful thing. You get this sort of like heat of the moment, like I'm in it and I'm writing it. Like I think that very well can happen. And I actually wonder, and this is me making a statement that I may or may not agree with, but I wonder if that works better in poetry. If poetry our tradition of lyric poetry in particular, you know, intense emotion recounted in tranquility, whatever the thing is. I wonder if poetry serves that better than fiction. Because I wonder if fiction, you often do need like even like a little more breathing space, but poetry you sometimes can dive right in. Yeah, that's it. That I agree. What stuff have you all been reading? What are the other narrative medicine pieces or works that y'all have been engaging with?
So interestingly, our School of Medicine book club has taken a real turn towards science fiction. So we've been reading a lot of Ted Chiang lately.
Yes, I love him.
Yeah, I mean, not to love. And I think more broadly, especially in our first year curricula, we're trying to find specifically applicable texts and narratives. So as the camera quietly slides toward me, we're looking at things that the students can directly apply to their clinical rotation experience. And Joanna, I don't know, I know that you've been out of medical residency for a hot second, but what I do find so interesting is that so much of your work was written. So I'm going to give a little more background, y'all, about Dr. You did a master's degree in English, right? At some point?
Yeah, I sort of did too. I did it Anglo-Irish, Irish literature, and then the MFA in poetry in between medical school. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Joanna, underachiever that she is, went to Johns Hopkins University for medical school, decided that being a medical student was not enough, so she took a couple of years off. I guess wrote in that MFA program a lot of the oldest mortal myth, then said, I'm ready to be a doctor again, wrapped up medical school, went to residency, had at least one baby in that period of time, then did residency, wrote Every Human Love after you had some time from that, and now this is there, right?
Yes, you got it exactly right. You got it.
I'm sorry. It's weird that I know all that about you and her.
No. No, I think we've also talked about it. I mean, I think that no, you've got it exactly right.
I think maybe drawing off of Chase's question, it might be interesting to hear if you can remember it. You know, you kind of lived this dual life in a really interesting way, and I know that you a lot of it by instinct, but you've done it by instinct quite well. So how did you balance love of the arts with love of medicine?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's a good question. I don't know that I'm always holding them in balance. And often I'm feeling existential angst when I'm not writing, if that makes any sense. And you know how you talk to writers and they're like, I get up at 5 a.m. and I write 1,000 words every day. And I'm always really envious. It's like, you know, when you go down internet life hack rabbit holes and it's like, well, this is what you do. And you do. I've never been able to operate with any kind of consistency. The only thing I can say is that the feeling of working on a thing and like getting into it is the best feeling in the world to me. And my gift is not consistency, but it might be efficiency. Like I am a fairly efficient person. And so if I can get it hooked in my head, you know, I keep referring to picking up a hitchhiker in Georgia. That is literally one of the stories if you want to read it. But if I get in my head like, oh, you know, she's burnt out from her intern year and the main character has been in the ICU and this and that, and she made a mistake and she forgot, you know, the patient had a mechanical valve and she did, and now that, and the patient died and she's an intern, but she's blaming herself. She feels like, and then she's going back to this childhood friend's wedding. Like, would that be the circumstance that an ordinarily risk-averse person might pick up a fairly creepy looking hitchhiker off the side of the road in the middle of nowhere? I don't know why I'm telling you all that, except that's the sort of thing that gets my mind excited. Like, that's the kind of like, oh, like where would that go? What would the, you know, how would we get into the situation? How would we get out of it? And when that hooks into my brain, I really like it. I suspect that then the relationship is, when I get to do that, I'm maybe like a hopefully a nicer, happier person to my patients. I mean, you know, do you know what I mean? Like that's a very simple relationship, but it's often something, I mean, it's something I talk to my patients about, where I really do believe that like everybody needs, at least in terms of their sort of Maslow's hierarchy, but like as higher order needs, most people really do need like challenge and mastery and that kind of engagement and the feeling of like your mind humming on something and sort of sorting a problem. And I enjoy my work and I get, there's clearly a relationship, you know, in terms of thinking about character and motivation and what people do, but I don't quite get the same flow state that I can occasionally get from writing. And so I think I need both to sort of, or no, keep things going, if you will. Does that answer?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wonder about with, you know, for our students is how much, like, does doing this kind of creative work make you a better doctor?
Yeah.
And, you know, as a person teaching humanities in a medical school, that I might be veering toward like, some level of engagement with humanities enriches your practice and makes you more capable, maybe in the term of getting back to that, you know, in these terms, I'm questionable about the term compassion fatigue and so, like, my brother is a physician and we debate about the utility of that frame, and who it puts the onus on, and turning compassion commodity, you know. So in that world, I think about, and you said, you know, I don't always have these things in balance, and who really does have all of the elements of their life in some kind of perfect harmony. But I wonder about engaging, like you're saying, in that deep thinking about the world and meaning and morality and humanity, and doing that work, then being able to go and serve in a healthcare environment.
It certainly is. I think it certainly is a way of developing that skill. My contrarian nature, I resist wanting to say it's the only way, because I've known some amazing physicians who just didn't have a flicker of a literary bone in their body. And so it must not, it must be a door, but it must not be the only door. And one way that I think of it is like really good, let's say really good fiction, it gets you in the room with the person. It gets you in the room with the person, and all of a sudden it's like, there you are, and it's like you sort of then see, you start to, I mean, that's how you get there. And I see what I see all the time with my day-to-day work is people can exist as annoyances and chores. And I'm getting this like kind of, you know, rude, snappy refill request, and someone, you know, is having a bad day and they leave kind of a brusque and it's very easy for me to feel very differently about that person as a name or as a voice on my voicemail. And then it's always astounding when I'm in the room, even if it's a Zoom room, but if I'm in the room with them, it's very hard not to find something to like or be interested or root for in that person. And I think that, and by the way, I think that's essential. That's essential for my practice. I think that if there's ever an instance where one utterly cannot connect with a person in that way, I think one ought not to serve as their psychiatrist, because you're not gonna serve them well. And I think that is a thing that good fiction does. So certainly it is a way, maybe not the only way, but it's a powerful one.
One budding narrative medicine scholar in this room as we speak, who may or may not know that I'm talking about her, who may have a question for Dr. Pearson, and her name may start with a T.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I guess my perspective is a bit different because I'm a literature PhD, but I am teaching fiction classes with emphasis on narrative medicine. So it was very interesting during the pandemic, during the last year, to see what texts they connected with, the students versus did not. And so I guess some of the texts that they were most interested in were Flowers for Algernon, which I've taught before, but revisiting during the pandemic was different. And we also read a YA novel, Everything, Everything. Have you heard of that?
No.
By Nicola Yoon. It's about someone who has who experiences Munchausen by proxy, and she believes that her mom has convinced her that she is allergic to everything, essentially. So she was isolated in a room, in a bubble, for her entire 18 years of life. And so reading that with my students this semester was, or last semester was, I think they could really relate to her.
Yes.
I don't know if I guess my question would be more, like, what kinds of things have you found yourself reading over the last year that maybe resonated in a different way, or that you connected with in a new way?
Also, you have a really beautiful backdrop. I'm feeling very envious of your space, at least as I can see it in the Zoom window. What I love the question of what people read that has been good. I recently read a short story collection by Sarah Shunley and Bynum called Likes. You may have, if any of y'all read The New Yorker, she's one of those people who publishes a lot of her short stories in The New Yorker. And I thought it was a really quite beautiful as a collection. So I really like that. I also really enjoyed, I really like the writer Danielle Evans, and she had a new sort of short story collection with a novella at the end called The Office of Historical Corrections. She's a wonderful writer. And the weird thing is, the only thing I don't love, I like short stories, I like novels. Novellas are a weird link for me, but she's good. It's wonderful. What else? Oh, I went back and I read sort of a classic. I was inspired by some article to revisit Shirley Hazard, who I know is a writer that I've heard Lauren Groff, who just had a new novel come out. I know that Lauren Groff really loved Shirley Hazard, and I've heard her on different podcasts and things. I went back and read The Transit of Venus, which I think is like 1980, 1981. And it was a commitment of a book, but it was really beautiful. And it feels good sometimes, I think, I read a lot of recently published like story collections, and a lot of, I'm always like, oh, a fresh new release, I want to read it. But I do think sometimes to cut against the grain and go back and read a book that was has stood out from even 1980, it's not that long ago, I guess. Similarly, since I'm thinking about older books, I don't know if any of y'all have read Stoner. Has anybody? I'm asking and I really can't see anybody's face. If anybody were nodding. Stoner by, who's the guy who wrote it? Like John something? John Edward Williams. That is, if you want to go back and read a beautiful old book. I'm going to stop, but I'll give one more recommendation because I can't stop. Another recent short story collection that I love, and I think this guy is a genius. If you haven't read A Lucky Man by Jamel Brinkley, race to the store. It's I think he's amazing. I think he's I can't wait to read what his next short stories are. So I could keep going all night long, but I will stop there.
We have a question in the room.
A question. It might be something that might not encompass all of your work, but what draws you to the darker ideas and darker imagery of your work and your poetry? It probably seems simple, but is it comes from your experience in medicine? Is it coming from other aspects of your life? But what is it that draws you toward that?
It's such a good question. One time, one of my brothers said to me, one of my brothers was like, what does psychiatrist Joanna think of writer Joanna? Like, what does she think is going on here? And I was, I don't know. I think one very simple answer is I do think that I do think that part of what literature offers is pleasure. And I think it ought to, and I think pleasure sounds like, oh, well, that's just the sweet coating that makes the deep lessons go down. And I actually don't think so. Like, I actually think that that pleasure in and of itself, if you're giving pleasure, if you're building a house and inviting the reader in and engaging them, it's almost only then that you're going to have, the moment that, like, oh, punches them in the gut, and they're like, oh, I feel implicated. How am I living my life? Like, I think pleasure is essential. It's an essential piece of that. And so one simple answer is that I think I find it pleasurable. I think that for me, a poem or a story, there's a kind of building of tension and a building of suspense. And I think even in a non-dark story, I think that is often true. I think particularly the short story form, I've heard people argue that, I heard Joy Williams say in an interview, the short story is an inherently chilling form. I have no idea what she actually meant, but it felt intuitively true when she said that. I was like, yes, the short story is a chilling form. And then I heard someone say, oh, every story is actually a ghost story. I don't know if that's true either, but I like it. I want to believe that it's true. So yeah, I think that I like things that are also like rubbing up against the edges, the sort of like liminal and the sort of sense of threat. I just think that I think it's rich terrain. So that was me giving you a real long jibber jabber to essentially say I like it. That's what I just like it. But great question. Any other thoughts or questions or wise parting words, Dr. Mitchell?
I think one has a follow-up.
Well, I was going to say, is that also reflective of works that you enjoy, or is it completely opposite?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I have a pretty broad, like I read pretty broadly, and so like a lot, some of the things I was telling you, I can't say that I don't know that in the same way, at least, Jamel Brinkley or Shirley Hazard. I don't know if they're kind of dark in the same way that like Shirley Jackson, Mary Gateskill, who I also really love. Like they're pretty, Carmen Maria Machado, she's pretty dark. I like that. But I do really like it in what I read, and among other things.
I have a parting request.
Yeah.
Benefit quite a bit from hearing things more than once. And I would really love to hear ministrations again.
Sure.
Mind reading. That.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like something in my gut, my gut was like, we need to end on a poem. It's time to end. Yeah, let me find it again. And okay, here we go.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for having me. Thank y'all. Ministrations. Sometimes the gentlest patient in the emergency room is from the city prison. This one too, soft voice, lifting his large dark eyes. He whispers, "Yes, ma'am," shy as a deer, young and brown-skinned with loosely muscled limbs gangling off the bed. His clean, uncoiled anatomy is almost embarrassing against pus and pannus, abscess and scarred vein. Everyone bearing his body like some separate, stricken animal, its disappointments inevitable. It seems impolite for us to notice the fact we are the same age, the silver handcuffs, track marks, the inefficiency of my exam, a rising smell of hot dung from the old lady in the next bed. Once, when realms were not distinct, celestial and earthly, angels visited, God-wed women ministered, bathed the feet of sinners, dough muzzled the saints' hands. And this would be the moment of cloudbreak revelation. There are no figs or honey here, just betadine and isopropyl pads. Thank you guys so much. It's been such a pleasure. Y'all are so patient and kind. I think anyone showing up to a Zoom event, I know everybody's got Zoom fatigue, so it's particularly lovely and generous of y'all to spend your time here. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me.